So in 2025, the border between Thailand and Cambodia went from just a point of tension to an all-out war zone. What we're going to unpack here is how a dispute that's centuries old suddenly exploded, and in the process revealed a brand new, way more aggressive playbook for how these kinds of conflicts are fought.
And this quote, it just nails it. This isn't some distant political disagreement anymore. For the people who actually live there, their homes, their communities, the border has literally become a front line.
You know, the moment everything changed really comes down to just 5 days in July. 5 absolutely brutal days where all that tension just finally boiled over. And let's be clear, this wasn't a small skirmish. This was a short, sharp war. Some of the most intense fighting that region has seen in a very, very long time.
So, how in the world does a border just explode like that? Let's break down how years of simmering tension suddenly ignited into a full-blown military fight that put the entire region on high alert.
I mean, the scale of the violence was just staggering. We're talking heavy artillery and rockets flying back and forth across the border, and then a huge escalation. Thailand brought in F-16 fighter jets to launch airstrikes. The human cost was immediate and absolutely devastating. Over 300,000 people had to flee their homes, and at least 38 people were killed in the fighting. So this all just begs two massive questions. After things being relatively quiet for years, why now? And why with so much force? And maybe more importantly, what does this aggressive new playbook really signal about where this whole thing is headed?
To really get the why, you have to look back, way back. Because this fight in 2025, it isn't really new. It's just the latest, and maybe most violent, chapter in a story that's over 100 years old. All of it happening in the long shadow of this one ancient temple.
And this right here is the heart of it all, the Preah Vihear Temple. It is a stunning, ancient complex built by the Khmer Empire, and it's perched right on a cliff on the border. That incredible location has made it a powerful symbol of national pride for both sides and, well, a constant source of conflict.
The roots of this fight run deep. It all starts with a French colonial map that put the temple inside Cambodia. Then, in 1962, an international court made it official. But, and this is a huge but, it left the ownership of all the land around the temple completely ambiguous. That ambiguity is what fueled clashes between 2008 and 2011. And it's what set the stage for the much, much more dangerous chapter we're seeing play out today.
Okay, so with all that history simmering in the background, Thailand's new strategy starts to make a lot more sense. What we saw in 2025 doesn't seem to be a random flare-up. It looks like a very calculated strategy of coercion, a playbook designed to force the issue, once and for all.
It really boils down to this three-pronged strategy. First, Thailand declared martial law, giving its military sweeping, almost total control over the border areas. Second, it hit Cambodia with an economic blockade by shutting down major checkpoints. And third, it used overwhelming force. We're talking air power and heavy weapons to make a decisive military point.
And don't underestimate that economic weapon. In 2024, we're talking about almost $4 billion in trade between the two countries. A lot of that flows right through the crossings that Thailand just shut down. So this isn't just about security. It's about using economic pain as a tool to force Cambodia to the negotiating table and to do it on Thailand's terms.
Now, from Cambodia's side, this wasn't some calculated strategy. They called it reckless and brutal military aggression. This quote from their officials just shows you how deep the divide is, how completely differently each side sees what's happening.
So how did Cambodia and the rest of the world push back? Well, what we're left with is this incredibly tense diplomatic standoff, held together by a ceasefire that, frankly, everyone knows is just hanging by a thread. And this really shows you the deadlock. You basically have two completely separate realities. Thailand says Cambodia was laying new landmines and firing rockets. Cambodia says no way. Thailand launched unprovoked attacks, hit civilians, and even damaged the historic temple. There is just zero common ground here.
Things got so tense that the regional group, ASEAN, had to step in. Malaysia, as the chair in 2025, managed to get both sides to agree to a ceasefire. But the key word here you have to remember is fragile. The troops haven't moved, the borders are still mostly shut down, and none of the underlying issues have been resolved.
This very shaky piece brings us to the most important question of all. Where does this go from here? As we see it, there are 3 very different and frankly very dangerous potential futures for this conflict.
But first, you have to understand the political pressure cooker this is all happening in. You've got intense nationalism on both sides, which creates this feedback loop where any leader who backs down looks weak. It's seen as a huge political defeat. This is the same pressure that actually got Thailand's prime minister removed. It makes any kind of compromise incredibly difficult.
So with that in mind, where could this all lead? We see three main possibilities: a peace that's forced on one side, a long, intense, frozen conflict, or, the worst case, a much wider war. Let's take a look at each one.
Okay, scenario 1, a forced peace. Basically, under all this military and economic pressure, Cambodia just gives in. This might stop the fighting for now, sure, but it would create a really unequal deal. It would leave behind this deep resentment that could easily, and probably would, explode again down the road.
Then there's scenario 2, a frozen conflict. This is where the ceasefire kind of holds, but nothing ever gets solved. The border just stays heavily militarized, the checkpoints stay closed, and it cripples the whole region. It creates this permanent state of tension where one little mistake, one miscalculation, could spark another war at any moment.
And that brings us to the most dangerous possibility: a wider war. With both armies on such high alert, all it would take is one mistake, a stray shot, a patrol that accidentally crosses the line, to shatter the truce. The result could be a war far more destructive than what we saw in July, one that could even drag in other countries in the region.
So let's zoom out for a second. Why does a border fight in Southeast Asia actually matter to the rest of us? Well, because what's happening here is setting a new and potentially very dangerous precedent for how countries deal with each other.
And here it is, the big picture takeaway. Thailand's strategy, this mix of military force, economic blockades, and tough demands, it marks a huge shift. It's a pivot away from working with regional partners and towards using raw, unilateral power to just take what you want.
Which leaves us with one final and pretty unsettling question. If this strategy of coercion actually works for Thailand, what kind of precedent does that set? If a country can now use force and economic muscle to get its way, what does that mean for stability, not just on this one border, but for the entire future of Southeast Asia?